After so many years of negotiations, Israel and Palestine failed to reach any peace agreement. In the meantime, Israel continues to expand its settlements in the West Bank and continues to discriminate against Palestinians and violate their basic human rights. Let's see what the media says now that Scarlett Johansson resigned from Oxfam. Rami Khouri writes an opinion piece in the Lebanese Daily Star titled "Occupation Belies the Hollywood Mind." Khouri starts by writing, "If you think the controversy of actress Scarlett Johansson's relationships with Oxfam and the Israeli company SodaStream is a minor side story about Hollywood celebrities, think again. This is the latest signal of a major direction of Palestinian and global activism against Israeli settler colonial policies in the occupied Palestinian territories, which reveals Israel's weak spot globally and its growing isolation because of its occupation and treatment of Palestinians." Johansson resigned her post Wednesday as a goodwill ambassador for Oxfam after coming under intense international criticism for her role as a spokesperson for SodaStream in the occupied West Bank. She could not feed the jailer and the prisoner. At the same time, she could not support the good work of Oxfam in improving people's lives around the world, while simultaneously promoting an Israeli company whose factory in the occupied West Bank perpetuates the subjugation of Palestinians and their denial of national and personal rights. Khouri adds Palestinians confront each other in three principal arenas of conflict and conflict resolution: military attacks, diplomatic negotiations, and grassroots activism based on legal and ethical principles. The first two modes have continued unabated since the 1930s without achieving the desired goals of either side. This is why the third option, populist activism on moral and legal grounds, has emerged recently on the Palestinian side, continues to pick up steam and worry the Israelis, as it should. The writer refers mainly to the BDS movement for the boycott, divestment, and sanction of Israel for its denial of Palestinian human rights in three related arenas. First, the second-class status of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Second, the apartheid-like conditions Israel imposes on Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank and the besieged Gaza Strip. And the structural denial of rights to exiled Palestinian refugees living outside of historic Palestine. Khouri says the BDS campaign has continued to win victories in recent years, including decisions by Norwegian and Dutch state investment funds, major European supermarket chains, the Methodist and Presbyterian churches in the United States and the European Union to refuse various forms of relationships or investments that involve Israeli companies or organizations based in the occupied Palestinian territories. Reuters reporter Noah Browning interviewed the mid-level Palestinian employee in SodaStream's plant who gave a more accurate picture, saying, "There's a lot of racism here. Most of the managers are Israeli and West Bank employees feel they can't ask for pay rises or more benefits because they can be fired and easily replaced." Khouri concludes saying the important new development in this episode is the ability of the BDS movement to mobilize globally and to generate greater discussion about the nature of the Israeli occupation and its denial of Palestinian rights. Joining us today is writer and researcher Ben White, writer in Memo Middle East Monitor. My first question, Ben, Oxfam said it found Scarlett Johansson promotion of Israeli firm SodaStream to be incompatible with her role as an Oxfam global ambassador. And my question is, Oxfam believes that businesses such as SodaStream that operate in Israeli settlements further the ongoing poverty and denial of rights of the Palestinian communities that it works to support. Oxfam is opposed to all trade from Israeli settlements which are illegal under international law. So Ben, in your opinion, where is the thin line here between doing business and supporting human rights?
Well, I think what Oxfam did was approach the question from the point of view of international law. And obviously, within international law, all of Israel's settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are considered illegal. And also there is the bigger picture of the fact that the settlement enterprise and Israel's network of colonies that it has established in the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967, they are the main reason why the Palestinian economy can't grow by itself. So the point is not whether SodaStream treats its workers badly or well, relatively speaking. The point is the fact that the settlement network itself is what is holding back the Palestinian economy, and Oxfam, like a growing number of charities, NGOs, and also businesses and pension funds, are taking the approach that in order to be consistent ethically, in order to most effectively challenge that status quo, there has to be sort of ties cut, that settlement trade is illegitimate, that businesses and individuals who work to legitimize the illegitimate also need to sort of face the consequences of that.
My second question, Ben, do you find Palestinians working in similar companies contradicting their own beliefs?
Well, I mean, the situation in the West Bank, as I was just mentioning, and this is documented by bodies like the World Bank and the IMF, there is a sort of captive labour market, really, in terms of the Palestinian workforce. And of course, many Palestinians need to provide for their families and will take jobs in settlements. And also, obviously, many of them also work inside Israel too. But that, the fact that some Palestinians benefit in terms of having a job in a settlement doesn't take away from the fact that many more Palestinians suffer because of the existence of the settlements, which have been built on expropriated land, which chop up the Palestinian territory into pieces. And of course, it's because of those settlements that the Israeli army, enforces all the other apartheid segregation type policies.
My last question, Ben. Rami Khouri of the Daily Star in Lebanon believes the important new development is the ability of the BDS movement to mobilize globally and to generate greater discussion about the nature of the Israeli occupation and its denial of Palestinian rights. Now, with negotiations and peace talks failing to hinder further settlements, do you think the BDS is the only way to go?
I think that we see the growth of strategies such as the BDS strategies in the last few years as a response from many people to the inability of the international community or so-called Western powers to end Israel's persistent violations of human rights. I think that you can see just how worried the Israeli government is by BDS. And you start to see also the momentum growing in the world of finance, in culture, in academia. And I think we're only going to see more of that, really, as people seize with both hands a strategy that gives people the ability to challenge and undermine decades-long systematic denial of one people's rights.
Despite the fact that business has no religion, and it's not just about religion. I mean, business goes on usually, and it does benefit other people who might think they should boycott Israeli companies that operate in the West Bank. But then again, that would affect them as well. So what do you think of that? I mean, especially when it comes to Arabs boycotting Israeli firms.
Well, I mean, the motivations for boycotts can differ, but I think you see, especially with sort of the world of business and finance, you start to see warnings now about the implications and risks for a business of being involved or complicit in settlement trade. So the UK government at the end of last year, issued guidance for businesses warning them of the implications or the risks that they run in doing business with the settlements. The EU has very similar guidance ready to go that is as yet unpublished. And I think one of the interesting things for me about the coverage of the Scarlett Johansson and SodaStream story was the way in which publications like the Financial Times and The Economist, which are sort of publications read by people working in the financial sectors especially, were clear about the way in which Israel faces and will only face more of a problem to do with boycott and divestment initiatives as long as it persists in these violations of international law.
Yes, so Ben, you think this movement is gaining momentum then globally?
Yeah, I think that's undeniable when you look at the number of developments, positive developments that have happened on campuses, in faith communities, trade unions, again, pension groups. Just in last month alone, there was a number of developments with regards to European pension funds and sort of investment bodies cutting ties with Israeli institutions. Interestingly, in the case, for example, of Dutch pension group PGGM, they cut ties with 5 Israeli banks because part of those banks' activities relates to the West Bank. It wasn't because the bank was exclusively a settlement enterprise or entity, but because part of the bank's work relates to the settlements and the occupation, the ties were cut by that pension group, by that pension fund. And I think this will be a trend that only continues to grow, especially as more and more people see, or as all of us see, the bankruptcy of the official peace process and its inability to deliver anything close to justice for the Palestinian people.
Thanks very much again, Ben, for joining us today at very short notice. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. That was Ben White, whose articles have appeared in The Guardian, Al Jazeera, The Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, and many others. And for more updates, please visit levant.tv. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.